First, we have authors Amitabha Bagchi, Manjula Padmanabhan, Timerian Murari, and Arunava Sinha talking about their favorite books. I invite the panelists to take their seats on stage.
Hi, good morning. Thank you. Did you read a book this morning? Good, I'm glad. You'd never have made it here otherwise. Right? We have three writers with us. From my left, Manjula Padmanabhan, who is a writer, a graphic artist, a cartoonist, and many other things besides. She's just started out. She's going to do a lot more. Right? And yes, on my far right, we have Amitabha Bagchi, who is he's a teacher of computer science at IIT Delhi. And because he's so bored doing that, he writes. And to my right, we have a gentleman who, what else do you do, sir, besides writing?
That's a good question. Well, besides writing, I play tennis.
Ah, right. So these are all writers, and recently there was a pitch made by a young writer. I hesitate to use the word writer in the same breath as the sentences which I use to describe my fellow panelists. But there was a young writer who went up to a publisher and said very proudly, "I don't read." And the publisher asked why. And he said, because there's no need. I know exactly what I want to write, and there's absolutely no need to read anything else. So we are at a situation now pretty soon where readers are going to be outnumbered by writers in India. And it is therefore a great relief that serious writers find that most of their useful time actually goes on reading. Elena Catton pointed out that 90% of a writer's time should be spent reading. She's actually set up a fund to finance writers to be able to read the books that they want. So I'm going to start by asking the three of you very quickly why you read, what you expect to get out of reading. Just very quickly.
Actually, when I started reading, it wasn't as utilitarian as the way you put it, in the sense of what I expect to get out of reading. But increasingly, I read, basically for pleasure, because I enjoy language. And mainly I read because it allows me to enter into a world and then stay in that world. I prefer reading longer pieces of fiction and stay in that world for a period of time. And that's something that I really enjoy, because it actually transports me, and it's like dreaming without having to go to sleep.
Right. So I'll just build on that question a little. As a writer, do you read differently from the way you'd read as a reader?
No, I read with the same attitude as a reader of discovering a whole new world which I haven't seen before, of going to new countries, listening to new thoughts. And it's also, when you're reading, you're reflecting on yourself as well. There's a resonance when you read, because you find things in books that resonate within you, and you become part of the book. Because every novel or even non-fiction book I read is that I'm looking at a different world, but I'm also looking at myself at the same time as I'm reading, not as an egotistical way, but I see things within myself that are reflected often in the novel. So I read for the enjoyment, but also to learn more on the craft of writing.
And what about you, Manjula?
Listening to the other two, I have to say, of course, it's pleasure. But I was thinking that for me, I was an avid reader as a child. And I would say that for me, reading was like eating. It was an intense and pleasurable thing. And I gobbled books. I inhaled them. And I feel sorry, I don't do that now. I don't read anywhere near as much as I used to as a child. And I miss that. I miss that intense immersion. But that's, you know, I read to lose myself, but not, you know, I inhabit other worlds while reading.
Do you read when you're writing, when you're actually in the middle of a book?
If I'm writing a book, I don't read. I don't read pretty much at all. And I spent the last 4 years writing a book, so for 4 years I haven't been reading. And when I finished that book in in July 2013, and between 2013 and now I have been gorging on books. I feel I've had to make up for lost time.
What about you, both of you? Do you read when you're writing? Does it disturb you or help you?
No, I always read. Like Manjula, I grew up in an age where there's no television, internet, cell phones. So I read from the age of 4. And even now when I'm writing a novel, I still read. Often is not non-fiction, or else something much lighter, just to get away and try and look back on my novel while I'm reading something else. So I use reading, even when I'm writing, as a distraction because otherwise writers become totally focused, which I can become obsessed when I'm writing, that I need to get out of it, get out of myself. So I read something else, as I say, usually non-fiction, but often very light fiction, just to escape the world I'm creating in my fiction.
Right. So from not reading at all to escaping the world you're writing about, and
so that actually the world creation part is a significant thing, because actually I realized that my primary mode ever since I was young is daydreaming. That's basically what I enjoy doing more than anything else. Not even enjoy, it's just what I do. So reading is a form of daydreaming, and writing is also a form of daydreaming. So I think Benjamin or someone said that the best way to acquire a book is to write it yourself. So when I'm writing a book, I've created the daydream that I want to be in at that time. And on the one hand, I want to finish it quickly so that it can get published and so on, and I can get invited to lit fests and such like. On the other hand, I don't want it to finish, because if it finishes, then it's finished. You know, it's like if I'm reading a fat book, on the one hand, I want to get through to it. On the other hand, I keep anxiously looking at the page number. How many left? How many left? How much longer can I stretch this? Right? So I have read while I'm writing in a specific way, which is that I'm stuck. So I go and pick up the one book which is on my shelf, which I've read before, which I know will act like a kick in the pants, because it'll make me feel that, yes, I also want to do this, or I want to do my own version of this. And there are, you know, for each book project that I'm working on, there are one or two such books on my shelf or on the internet or in a bookstore somewhere that when I get badly stuck, I just go to that person, and sometimes I need to read only 3 or 4 pages, and it slides me back into the zone.
so you actually have designated books for each novel that you're writing, or every time you're
Well, I
writing a
don't
novel?
designate them in advance. You know, basically the way it works is I get badly stuck, then I remain stuck, then I complain to my wife, I become disagreeable, I shout at my students, and then one morning I wake up and I say that maybe I should look at that book. And then it works like that. So it gets designated at that moment.
So that's a good cue, and you were talking about fat books. So are you going to read us from your favorite book and then tell us why it's your favorite?
Well, okay,
in
so
what circumstances?
this is not my favorite book in the sense of favorite of all time, but I'm going to hold it up to the camera. Where is the camera? Ah, there it is. This is volume 1 of In Search of Lost Time. It's called Swan's Way. There are 6 volumes. And in case you think I'm an expert on Proust, I certainly am not. I'm only in the middle of volume 5 right now. And I say that because I'm getting worried as I move through volume 5. There's only volume 6 left right now. Swan's Way is, I'm sure you've all heard of Proust's sort of this mega project, 6-volume project, where which was possibly like very autobiographical, although he's evasive about it. The narrator is called Marcel, like himself. It's basically about a couple of love affairs, doomed love affairs, set in France, in Paris, and largely in Paris and this northern coastal town, sort of fictitious town called Balbec. These men who are in love with women who are unfaithful to them, and the sort of world, the society world that surrounds these people of leisure, spending their time, getting jealous and cheating on each other. There is absolutely nothing about this setting or these people which a priori was interesting to me. I had absolutely no interest in the French upper leisure classes at the beginning of the 20th century. So when I picked up the book and I started reading it, I didn't necessarily expect to keep reading it. I thought, you know, theek hai, people talk about Proust, let's see what it's all about. But I was grabbed by the scruff of my neck and I was just pulled along by his sentences. So Proust is a master of sentences. He writes very long ones. There's about one per page. So it's a 600-page book. There must be at most 700 sentences in it. Not more than that. Right? If you find a 6-word sentence in this, show it to me, I'll give you 10 rupees. Okay? So, I mean, there are several important things about this work. One specific small nugget regarding Indian English fiction is the following, that the shadow lines, Amitav Ghosh is the shadow lines, he said in interviews before that he had just finished reading Proust, and reading Proust gave him an idea for the structure, and you know the shadow lines moves in this sort of non-linear kind of way. But actually this is not true. A close friend of his told me that he had only finished reading 1.5 volumes. And he called him up and said, ah, that's it, I've read 1.5 volumes, now I know how the shadow lines is going to be structured. And he went ahead and did it. And the way Proust jumps from time to time, he moves forward, backward in memory, the technique is quite subtle and nuanced. He just does it. He just starts a new paragraph and starts writing, and you are supposed to figure out where it is in time. But I think talking about Proust and this text is completely pointless. If I can I read a little bit? I've got 2 small excerpts, and small is relative word in this situation. I'll read you one of them. Here it is. When a man is asleep, he has in a circle round him the chain of the hours, the sequence of the years, the order of the heavenly bodies. Instinctively, he consults them when he awakes, and in an instant reads off his own position on the earth's surface and the time that has elapsed during his slumbers. But this ordered procession is apt to grow confused and to break its ranks. Suppose that, towards morning, after a night of insomnia, sleep descends upon him while he is reading, in quite a different position from that in which he normally goes to sleep. He has only to lift his arm to arrest the sun and turn it back in its course, and at the moment of waking, he will have no idea of the time, but will conclude that he has just gone to bed. Or suppose that he dozes off in some even more abnormal and divergent position, sitting in an armchair, for instance, after dinner. Then the world will go hurtling out of orbit, the magic chair will carry him at full speed through time and space, and when he opens his eyes again, he will imagine that he went to sleep months earlier in another place. But for me, it was enough if, in my own bed, my sleep was so heavy as completely to relax my consciousness. For then I lost all sense of the place in which I had gone to sleep, and when I awoke in the middle of the night, not knowing where I was, I could not even be sure at first who I was. I had only the most rudimentary sense of existence, such as may lurk and flicker in the depths of an animal's consciousness. I was more destitute than the cave dweller, but then the memory. not yet of the place in which I was, but of various other places where I had lived and might now very possibly be, would come like a rope let down from heaven to draw me up out of the abyss of not being, from which I could never have escaped by myself. In a flash, I would traverse centuries of civilization, and out of a blurred glimpse of oil lamps, then of shirts with turned-down collars, would gradually piece together the original components of my ego.
Thank you. We might come back to you. What about you? What book stirs you the most?
And that's when I knew I was going to be on this panel with that question. I'm not quite sure how to answer it. It's like asking a sultan which one is his favorite wife among 1,000. So I don't have a Sherazad as such. So every one of these wives are my favorites. When I was looking at my library to see which ones should I choose, I've got all of Hemingway, I've got all of Graham Greene, all of Norman Mailer, all of Chekhov, and it's hard to choose a favorite writer. I learn from all of them, and I go back to them. The other day I went back to read Hemingway's A Movable Feast, because I'd spent some time in Paris earlier, and I just wanted to see what he'd written. Now, he's a wonderful writer. His Movable Feast is one of the most moving books I've read, as he recalled that Paris of that day. But having been asked that question about who's a favorite author, I mean, my present Sherazad, who I sometimes go back to, is Marquez, who I came across, and I have all of his books as well. So reading any writer at any time inspires me. It helps me through my own work. So what I'm going to do, I'll just read a little bit of Marquez, just because he opened up another world for me, because most writers prior to Marquez didn't use magic realism, and I suddenly discovered this man who could write magic realism, which is a whole new world. He made it more mythological, and that appealed to me, I suppose, as an Indian in mythology. So what I'd like to do is just read. Marquez, like Proust, also writes very, very long sentences. His Autumn of the Patriarch, I think, is only one sentence, and it runs through about 600 words, 600 pages. So I'm afraid my book, I'm not going to hold up the cover because the cover's a bit worn.
You can't doubt it's been read.
Yes, I'm afraid it has been read. So I'd like to just read a small piece, and why he inspires me often. Because Marquez is the one of the few writers who can open a novel with just a paragraph or a line and make you want to read the rest of it. This is from his book, Love in the Time of Cholera, before he died, one of his major novels. It was inevitable. The scent of bitter almonds always reminded him of the fate of unrequited love. Dr. Juvenile Urbino noticed as soon as he entered the still, darkened house where he had hurried on an urgent call to attend a case that for him had lost all urgency many years before. The Antillean refugee, Jérôme de Saint-Amour, disabled war veteran, photographer of children, and his most sympathetic opponent in chess, had escaped the tormentsome memory with the aromatic fumes of gold cyanide. That's all he writes in that one paragraph, and you want to know what happens for the rest of the novel. And at the moment, as you can see, I'm reading him again, but I read this one many years ago, and I go back to reading my favorite authors. I go back to Chekhov, I go back to all of them, and including Guy de Maupassant and everybody else. So for me, reading, I can't say I have a favorite wife. They're all my favorites.
Yes, thank you. But I think literature insists that we take positions.
Yes, no, literature doesn't ask you to take position. The literature asks you to read it and to think about it and to come to your own conclusions about what that writer is reflecting on.
Certainly, certainly. But I'm curious to know why autumn, why Love in the Time of Cholera in particular when it comes to Garcia Marquez?
Well, I've read all the 100 Years of Solitude, Autumn of the Patriarch. I just happened, you asked me to come on this panel, and this book was beside my bed, on my bedside table. So I just picked it up this morning, and I said, okay, this is on my bedside table, I'll bring it along. But I've read all his novels, Chronicles of a Death Foretold, and each one of them gives me a great joy to read him and a greater understanding of A, the people he brings to life, and B, the sheer talent he has. And at times I'm envious when I'm reading him, wishing I could write like him. But of course, no writer can write like another writer. We all have our own identities as writers. But what you can learn from other writers is to see how they've done it, how they've created it, what kind of depth they bring into their characters. So, in answer to your question, he was on my bedside table. If this program had been next week, on my bedside table there might have been Mukherjee. But I'd finished him last week.
Which Mukherjee?
The latest one, Neil Mukherjee's latest Mukherjee's book. But I finished him last week, and I was just coming and put it back in my library, so I picked this one up.
Right, right. Thank you. Yes. Well, I'm very pleased that both of you chose works which have been translated. So, hat tip to translators. Manjula?
Well, when I saw the program and I knew that I would be on this panel, I thought to myself, what can I do which would be a little bit different to the other two? And I didn't know what they would read, but I was very sure that they would read extremely sophisticated intellectual texts. I was not wrong at all. And, and I chose, and I will admit that it came quickly to my mind, to choose something that is such a great favorite and has been for very many years. I chose a childhood book. I chose one of the Alice books. And rather than go to Alice in Wonderland, which most people know very well, I chose the other book, Through the Looking Glass, which in some ways I prefer because it's hallucinatory. It's like Lewis Carroll was smoking something very strong. And I have really always enjoyed both books. And I thought I would choose a passage that has always resonated with me. I guess we'll talk about this a little more later on, but I'd like to read the piece. So this is, I'm sure I don't have to describe Alice Through the Looking Glass, but the little girl passes through the mirror into a land where everything is reversed. And she was playing, there was a chessboard near her with a game in progress. So when she passes through the looking glass, she finds herself on a chessboard or near a chessboard and in conversation with the Red Queen. And so she's been talking to the Red Queen. And I'll continue now. Alice never could make out, in thinking it over afterwards, how it was that they began. All she remembers is that they were running hand in hand. And the Queen went so fast that it was all she could do to keep up with her. And still the Queen kept crying, "Faster, faster!" But Alice felt she could not go faster, though she had not the breath left to say it. The most curious part of the thing was that the trees and the other things around them never changed their places at all. However fast they went, they never seemed to pass anything. I wonder if all the things move along with us, thought poor, puzzled Alice. And the Queen seemed to guess her thoughts, for she cried, "Faster, don't try to talk." Not that Alice had any idea of doing that. She felt as if she could never talk again. She was getting so much out of breath. And still the Queen cried, "Faster, faster," and dragged her along. "Are we nearly there?" Alice managed to pant out at last. "Nearly there?" the Queen repeated. "Why, we passed it 10 minutes ago. Faster!" And they ran on for a time in silence, with the wind whistling in Alice's ears and almost blowing her hair off her head, she fancied. "Now, now," cried the Queen, "faster, faster." And they went so fast that at last they seemed to skim through the air, hardly touching the ground with their feet, till suddenly, just as Alice was getting quite exhausted, they stopped, and she found herself sitting on the ground, breathless and giddy. The Queen propped her up against a tree and said kindly, "You may rest a little now." Alice looked around her in great surprise. "Why, I do believe we have been under this tree the whole time. Everything's just as it was." "Of course it is," said the Queen. "What would you have it?" "Well, in our country," said Alice, still panting a little, "you generally get to somewhere else if you ran very fast for a long time, as we've been doing." "A slow sort of country," said the Queen. "Now here, see, it takes all the running you can do to keep in the same place." If you want to get somewhere else, you must run at least twice as fast as that. In my opinion, this is one of the most profound statements I have ever read.
That last line must resonate a lot with writers in particular.
Thank you. I think that's what I wanted to share.
When did you first read this book? At what age?
I would have read it at 7, but as we were talking early, just before this, at the time I read it, I enjoyed it for what it was, for an adventure. But as the years went on and I returned to it, it had, I mean, these books have a depth that is quite extraordinary. And they have meanings that go far beyond a children's adventure, and yet they are still charming as an adventure. I do love them, really.
Do you as writers find yourself almost inadvertently analyzing the writing style and technique of books that you love?
Not automatically, because you're reading the story, you're immersed in the story, and it's only when you have reached the end of it that you go back and reflect on how the story was structured, how well it was paced. All these things then come to mind. But if you're reading at that same time as trying to analyze, you then lose the whole pleasure of the book, and you lose exactly what you should be getting from the book is a reflection of what is happening inside you, because you get so involved in trying to say, okay, this is how he did it on this page, this is how he did it on that page. And I can't read like that. I have to finish it, and then I go back and think about it. And if there's some things I want to look at, I go back. But I read right through without saying, oh, this is very clever, or this is very well done, this is the way I'd like to do my book. So I read from start to finish, and then, as I say, think about it and think whether I can restructure a novel or restructure something which I've been working on.
Are you writing a novel now? Are you in the middle of a work?
Yes, I am.
And what are you reading?
What am I reading? At the same time, I was reading some very sad, there's a book out, The Letters from Indian Soldiers from World War I. It is a collection of their letters, and they're very moving and very sad. And the surprise is that they, as Charles and I were discussing earlier, that they were so loyal to the King Emperor, and they were dying on the fields of Flanders and everything else. So that is what I'm reading right now, all these letters that have been put together recently because of World War I celebration. But these are by Indian sepoys, as they were then called, fighting in France.
And does it have any bearing on what you're writing?
None at all. Absolutely none, because I'm not writing about a world war. But I just wanted to read these letters because they were there, and to learn, because I had written a novel a long time ago about one of my characters. I'd taken on Kipling's Kim, as a character in my novels, and I sent him to the First World War, and I had to research what it was like for an Indian soldier fighting in this foreign country. And so I was just wanting to read these letters to see whether I had got it right.
What about you? Do you read in preparation for your new book?
No, generally not. But so actually, last year I started reading this, but before that, in the years before that, apart from occasional reviews, I've been exclusively reading in Hindi. So what happens there is that normally I don't stop to analyze, but sometimes when I'm reading in Hindi, I am pulled up at a point where I think, oh, how would that be done in English? How do you achieve that in English? How do you get this to sound like this in English? Very occasionally. Otherwise, I normally, I mean, if it's a book where I have to stop a lot to see what the writer is doing, then that is not really worth doing. I mean, then it's not worth reading for pleasure, because the primary point is pleasure. But also, of course, you know, you are working at some level. So maybe while you're reading, you don't think about it, but then later you think, oh, this happened like this, that happened like that. So I don't read in preparation, but sometimes it feels like it's all preparation. Right? Because you never know down the line which text that you read long back will suddenly become relevant at some point. So it's hard to tell whether you are preparing or not.
And what about contemporary, I mean, both of you write in English, so do you read a fair amount of contemporary Indian writing in English? Both of you, yes.
Oh, yes, I do. Because I said I just finished a recent Neil Mukherjee.
Yes.
And I've been reading a very good Sri Lankan writer, Gunasekharan, Reefs, if I remember the title.
Yes.
Reef. And so other Indian writers I come across, I mean, certainly Amitabh I've read, and Salman. So yes, I do read Indian writers quite a lot, because there are some very talented writers around. So yes, I read whoever I can get hold of,
right.
And I admire a lot of what is being written.
Bhakti, you?
Well, with the day job, I don't get that much time to read, and also a young child, so reading time is very limited. I read occasionally contemporary writers. Normally, the only way I can carve out the time to do it is if I commit to review them for someone. But otherwise, I don't get that much time to read. I try to read what I can. I always read excerpts as I can to see whose prose attracts me enough that then I commit to reading a whole book. But I've not been reading, I'm guilty, I've not been reading as much of my contemporaries as I should be. In fact, I was just telling Tabish this, and you know, it applies to me. There's this Urdu poet, popular Merathi, and I'll translate this line. So it's a poet at a mushaira saying, "Tu apni ghazal पढ़ के खिसकता है किधर को, मैंने तो तुझे सुन लिया, अब तू भी मुझको सुन." Right, meaning that, you know, you read your ghazal and you're heading out of the room. I listen to you, now you listen to me. So I feel guilty as charged on that count when it comes to reading my
I think
contemporaries.
those last two lines made it to a Hindi song somewhere.
No, it's something similar. It's something similar, but not quite that.
Yes. What about you, Manjula?
Well, I can say that just before coming to this festival, I finished reading Alan Seeley's book, The Small Wild Goose Pagoda, which I enjoyed hugely. I also, aren't I a very conscientious reader? I also read all the 39 stories in David Devidar's A Clutch of Indian Masterpieces. I highly recommend it. It is a wonderful collection of tastes and flavors from all over India. I mean, obviously India is large enough that this book could be much bigger, but as a start in that direction, it is a really, really good collection. And I wrote as a kind of tribute to the book, I wrote very short descriptions and posted them at my blog, because I really think if one is a writer, then one owes it to one's fellow writers to write about their books. And because we can now all blog and post on Facebook. And I've only recently, like in the last 10 days, aligned myself with Facebook, so now I'm busy posting away. It's a great pleasure to actually not write a review, because writing reviews, you know, one's claws and talons are out, but writing brief descriptions, my aim is to be friendly and to just be descriptive and appreciative. So I find that this is quite a change from being a reviewer, and it's something that I enjoy.
But you know, Manjula, if I don't like a book, I return it to the editor. I only write reviews of books. I once or twice got stuck with a book that I did not like. And more than the fact that it'll make an enemy, which it has on occasion, is that how will I actually read this damn thing till the end? I can't read a book which I don't like. But I have to not only read it, but there's the editor of the publication saying, where's your review, and I have to write it. So now, very quickly I skim through it. If I don't like it, I call them back and say, really sorry, please, can I send this back to you now? So I end up spending my own money sending things back. But if I like a book, then like the Small Wild Goose Pagoda, I actually refused it for one publication, then saw the review they ran, and struck by remorse, I called the editor of another publication saying, please, can I review it? And then I slaved on that review and published it. Really? So I think the review is a forum where a long considered view can go out to a much larger audience, and it should be seen as that, rather than what many of our contemporary reviewers find it as just a place to tear something down without even thinking about it.
Right.
Of course, writers reviewing other books has special value. Yes, sorry, you want to say something, because then we'll take questions.
Right. No, I've been asked to review books and I refuse. The last book I did review was Rom Whittaker's book on snakes. And that was some years ago. And that was because Rom is a friend of mine. And it's a coffee table book on beautiful snakes.
Coffee table book on snakes.
Yes. That was the last one I reviewed.
Would you like some snakes with your coffee?
Yes. Where we come from, that's the order. Right. We'll take questions, and we'll take aggressive questions first. Yes, here's an aggressive question. Yes, please.
Thank you all. You talked about reading, but do you also read together? What is the practice, process, and challenge of reading together, if you could tell us? Secondly, to Mr. Murari, you said that you look at books as your wives. I have had the joy of meeting you and your wife. How does your wife look at such a description of books? I would just like to submit. Erasmus looked at books as friend. So what impact a language, in what way we look at book, has on the way we relate to books and the creative world?
Thank you, thank you. Yes.
Well, can I quickly come in before answering a second? My wife is my Shahrazad.
See, now you know why he's a writer. Yes, you want to talk quickly about reading together?
Reading together is great fun if the people you're reading together with are the right people, right? And it can be very interesting to read in groups and so on, but it needs a particular dynamic. I wouldn't recommend it to anyone. But in general, reading is considered to be a solitary activity. And the beauty of it is the solitariness of it. You know, here I am in full view. I'm sitting in the plane, I'm sitting in, at home, wherever, but I'm not here. I'm inside this book.
You're on Facebook?
No, I'm certainly not on Facebook. I'm on Facebook without the face.
To Arunava, I have a question for all the three of you. Manjula said that when she writes, she doesn't read, so for 4 years she's not been reading till she has finished her book. And the other one is Bakshi said that whenever he gets stuck, he tends to read something, probably to get ideas or to continue his book in a different way. And Tim said he does read, and he also goes through the style at the end of the book after he finishes it. So I would like an answer from all the three of you about the remarks you have made, about the statements you have made about your reading.
Thank you. Also, that was a brilliant summing up of the panel.
That was.
Arunava, can I have one question to you?
All right,
please?
we'll take that and then we'll have the answers.
Yeah?
Yes.
What is your favorite book, Arunava? Would like to listen to it.
Oh, my favorite book. If I answer that now, the rest of the time will go. So let's take that offline if you don't mind. Sorry, Manjula, you want to answer that? Oh, all right. Well, in a similar vein, one book I go back to is a very slim play written in Bangla by a man named Shukumar Rai, who's Satyajit Ray's father, which to me sums up the human existence, because the first line in it says, why didn't Shotobahan Babu and his group come? And the answer is, that's because we believe Ishan Babu insulted them yesterday. And Ishan Babu said, no, nothing particular, we just call them selfish apes. But, given how impatiently they were behaving, it was not extraordinary at all. And the first man says, yes, they should have had the grace to realize that it was the truth. So that for me sums up.
So to return to how we read, I read. I am extremely private. I'm very private as a writer as well. I don't like to be in company. In fact, for this book that I took 4 years over, I rented an apartment in the US, and I've been stuck there for most of the 4 years, starting 2010. And I read in a similar way. I don't like to be interrupted. I will sometimes put off, especially the last portion of a book, I will put off reading it so that I'm properly alone and not going to be disturbed. I read late into the night. And I hate that. I can't read on buses or trains. I get travel sickness, so I can't. So I have to be stationary, I have to be comfortable and undisturbed.
Right, thank you. And
the same question, is it? Whether I'm reading with others?
No, this is about the fact that you do read when you're writing.
Yes.
Unlike Manjula.
Right. No, the reason, because as I said, I need that distraction sometimes from my obsession on a book. And I often do also turn to crime thrillers, which are the best way to just escape, because you're not writing the same kind of genre. And sometimes when I am writing, I often just read these light crime thrillers, because I know nothing of what I'm reading is ever going to enter my own writing. But it's a distraction from the obsession of trying to get this novel done.
So with me, distraction is fairly easy even when I'm writing, because I'm a computer scientist and researcher, so that distracts me from this and this distracts me from that. So there's always a distraction available if you want a change, and then of course there's a distraction of day-to-day life and so on and so forth. I wish I could read, I wish I could get any time alone to read. Unfortunately, I don't. So I just read whenever I can. But for works which really demand some, like where you don't like your flow, your reading flow to be disturbed, I end up reading them late at night. And so I read them very slowly, unless, I have a holiday or my son has gone to his grandparents' house or something, in which case I can read 40, 50 pages. I spent a lot of time the first day here catching up on my reading because my family is not here with me. So I try to make the best of whatever time I can get, and often it means I have to go back and read a page again to create the flow. But, reading is precious, but it's also demanding. So you have to kind of make the compromise whichever way and do it however you can.
So yes, so if I may just sum up, reading for writers, what it means for different writers: abstinence. I'm not using the word celibacy. Escape and distraction, and inspiration. Would that be about right?
So, yeah.
Right? Thank you. And we beat the It's a Rap label. We are done before he was going to raise it. So, thank you very much. Thank you. And have a great day.